Hey, g'day, Adele here from Team EQ with the shortened, abridged version of the 3 strategies to successful conflict resolution. You'll get it all within about 15 minutes or so, because I do understand people are busy and sometimes they just can't get to the other side. So hopefully the reason why you're here is because you are looking for a better strategy or maybe even some better advice with which to deal with that office conflict. Now, the conflict could be brewing between yourself and somebody else, and in that way it's a strategy for yourself. Or you could be looking for some advice from others to others. So people within your team that are struggling with this thing called conflict management. It is a skill that can be absolutely taught. It's not often taught, so congratulations for being here. Now, when we do the longer class, when we do the actual masterclass, I always ask, what is the impact? So we take a pulse of what's currently happening. What is the impact of that team conflict and the mismanagement or the non-management of it? Because 80% of teams out there are not actively managing their conflict. They are avoiding it, or they go into this absolute what we call tell, yell, or tell, sell, and yell mode, which is confrontation. Okay, so the effects of not dealing with that thing called conflict, which 80% of teams are doing, productivity goes down. We all know about that productivity, low performance seeps in, which means that there is a lack of accountability within the team. The team are resistant to getting results. Toxic environment can start spilling itself over. And over the last 12 years, I've done a lot of DISC profiling. I understand the thing called subgrouping. I know where it comes from and who actually starts to engage in it. So let's just start busting some myths that not all conflict is bad. If everybody had to get on all the time, which is physically impossible, and everybody be happy all the time, we would actually not come up with that thing called innovation. Okay, so we want to use it as a driver, but in a resourceful way. Conflict can actually be a massive gift and opportunity, and it's got this thing that grows our PQ brain, which is what today's masterclass is about, is the 3 successful conflict management strategies according to neuroscience. Now, full disclosure, I used to be an absolute, let me just see if I can change this. I can't, I changed the screen. I used to be an absolute chronic avoider and kind of sweep the potential conflict under the carpet. I used to lead with a fight, flight, freeze response with regard to conflict, which you'll see is the total opposite of what we're actually wanting to achieve. It is a survivor brain strategy. It is the only thing that I knew. So, kudos to myself. Now, it's not like I am the best conflict manager in the world. However, my bounce back is way quicker. Meaning I don't sit at nighttime going, oh my goodness, I didn't say that thing I wanted to say. I don't beat myself up about it. Number 2, I don't have to get it to the tipping point of, okay, I've had enough now. I've swept under the carpet enough. I've eaten enough of this stuff. Now I'm going to explode. It's not resourceful to anybody else. And I just have this more resilient outlook towards it. And actually, the tools that I now have, which is what your team normally wants, they want tools with which to deal with conflict, is actually so multifaceted that it doesn't actually get to the conflict point of butting heads. We do have different opinions. I have different opinions to people, but because of these tools that I want to share today, it's not all kind of doom and gloom, and it's not crisis management is what I want to say. Okay. So here we go. So nope. All right. No. The neuroscience approach to conflict management. Think about your brain like your phone. It has various apps. These apps are usually where most trainings concentrate on giving people apps, which need to obviously be upgraded. And it doesn't really look at the hardware, so the operating system. And that's what I love about this neuroscience approach, because that's so multifaceted, because you're looking at the hardware and the operating system. And it's the work based off the work of Shirzad Chamine of positive intelligence. Its application is far more reaching. And we're not only looking at the app, we're looking at the operating system and the hardware. Now, if you stick with me until the end of these 15 minutes, then there will be a bonus offering for your team, because here's the kicker. You may be a leader that is totally switched on, tuned in, turned on. and has its finger on the pulse and is curious about things, has noticed there's this thing called conflict, there's this elephant in the room, it doesn't want to be spoken about, but I need to do something different. Your team might not know that. They may not. Sometimes they are what we call unconsciously incompetent. They don't know what they don't know yet. So we have an offer for you afterwards at the end of the call. Now, I always, on the bigger, longer calls, the masterclasses, there is quite a lot of interaction. And because it's not a monologue, this is unfortunately a monologue. And we get people to really understand, well, what would it cost them? What is the impact of not addressing this thing called conflict management in a resourceful way? So what would it cost you to, a year from now, we sit and have the same conversation. What would it cost you mentally, emotionally, physically, leadership wise? What is the cost to company? Sometimes if you're running your own company, not looking after this thing called conflict management can be a huge turnover within your staff, and that costs money. Okay, we also look at your goals. So again, the longer masterclass, we have a little bit more time for this. We don't have it right now. Let's just jump into the 3 strategies to successful conflict resolution via the neuroscience approach. I just need to drink a little bit of my tea. Okay. There's 3 things to take in consideration. It's a thing called the vortex and mirror neurons, knowing what that is and how it's affected and how it affects your team. Number 2 is the practice of mindfulness. And number 3 is knowing your saboteurs. Those are the 3 successful conflict management strategies. So if you want to end the call right now, you just know it's your vortex, the mirror neurons, mindfulness, and knowing your saboteurs. See you later. But this graphic might give you a little bit more of an insight with regard to this thing called mirror neurons and the vortex. Now, in our brains, we have 2 very distinct sections. One is called our survivor brain, which I love to point at is kind of this amygdala response. It's where the fight, flight, freeze response sits. It is necessary for us as human beings to survive or to have, and we have to have it. But there's this newer part of our brain, our PQ brain. It's where our thrive, where our flow state sits. It's where successful conflict management resides. Not in survivor. Survivor brings out the dukes. It brings in the fight, flight, freeze response. Okay, so people either fight each other, they avoid each other, or they lie down and pretend that they're going to, they're dead. That's the freeze response. That's the kind of overarching of that. Or there's this PQ brain, which is where the vortex comes in. Now, the vortex is this one. Let me show you a little bit further down. And the vortex is really fascinating when you look at team dynamics, because we look at what a team PQ score is. We look at what the team's overall positive intelligent quotient is, and we've got a way to work that out. Now, what happens if the majority of the team, or if a big player in the team, it doesn't have to be a leader, but somebody with a big personality in the team, is not using their new brain, their PQ brain? They're not using that, executive part of the brain, that thrive part, and they're using more of their survivor brain. Well, then that's where the vortex is going to lie, and they're actually going to drag other people down into that survival vortex as well. Now, what happens in survival? That's where the saboteurs come out to play. And that's when we have saboteur versus saboteur within the workspace. And the kicker is that saboteurs don't want a solution. They just want to be right. So think of it as knowing about these things called your vortex and the mirror neurons, because mirror neurons is you see something in somebody else and it kind of activates something in you. So if you as a leader are in a high vortex, you're in a high PQ state, you're using a lot of your executive brain, you're using that new brain as opposed to the amygdala side of the brain, well, then you're going to ignite other people's prefrontal cortex. If you as a leader are in survivor brain, blame, shame, guilt, irritation, frustration, well, it's going to ignite other people's survivor brain. And when it comes to conflict, our conflict actually can trigger our saboteurs, of which there are 9, 10 with a big overarching one, which you go into in depth in our masterclass or our workshops. But conflict triggers those saboteurs if we don't have a good hold over them and we don't have a good understanding of them. Conflict not only triggers ours, but it also brings out the saboteurs in other people. And remember what I said about saboteurs only want to be right. They don't want a solution. They want to be right. I'm going to tell you how I'm right. And then when you don't listen, I'm going to tell you even more. And then eventually I might yell at you to tell you how I am right and you are wrong. And that's not where conflict resolution lies. So strategy number 1 is know the vortex. Manage your vortex, okay? And know that your mirror neurons will ignite other people's mirror neurons in them. So that, if you're seeing a lot of sabotage, if you're seeing a lot of survivor, well, then actually there's a reflection. And that's where mirror neurons are so cool to understand. So if nothing else from today, just remember this visual. Thrive brain, executive brain, PQ brain, Zen brain, call it the new brain, but it's this it's a different area, different neurology to survivor brain, and know that conflict triggers that survivor brain. It triggers those saboteurs that live in survivor brain until we have a great grasp over that. And that's what our 8-week, boot camp goes through. Now, strategy number 2 is one of my favorites, and it is the practice of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness that we can take to work, that we can charge our brain, that we can charge that executive brain, like charging a car, like charging your Tesla, like charging your phone, in order to charge it to do the job that it can or needs to do. So often we neglect to charge our brains. We don't know how to charge our brains. And this is where the practice of mindfulness, it starts with 10 seconds. We have a gym. We have it all done for you when we roll out the programs with our groups. You'll see there in the visual, I actually have teams that before they have a stakeholder meeting, before they have negotiations, before they have something where they know they need to engage that prefrontal cortex, they need to engage that new brain, not the old brain, the new brain, they actually go and do their charge. They do their PQ reps, that's what it's called, and they put on their little recording, and together 2 minutes they all sit and do it together. So they bring mindfulness very much to the workspace. And why that's important is because we want to grow our mental muscle. Okay, so with regard to this successful conflict management, there's mental muscle that we have to grow. Otherwise, it's just insight. But 80%, and this is where the 80% comes in, of teams don't manage conflict because they do not grow their mental muscle. And it's a great team building activity. So there's our visual again. We have choice. We can either stay in survive mode, where it's the long slog, it's the Groundhog Day. It's where our saboteurs live. And remember, conflict triggers the saboteurs if we don't have a good hold on them. And then there's this thrive brain that we can grow. And it's this prefrontal cortex area. It's a part of our right brains. It's a very different empathetic neural circuitry. And it is where our flow state sits. Okay, so those 2 parts. In our masterclass, I tell you a little bit more about Jane the Pleaser, because the pleaser is actually one of our sabotage programs. It's the one that always wants to keep the peace. The peacemaker is the pleaser. They take on a lot of work. They take on excess work. Other people kind of dump their work on them because they know so-and-so will get it done. And then eventually so-and-so kind of just can't do it anymore. And then it becomes a volcano and the conflict ensues. Now, know this about your saboteur. So this is conflict management strategy number 3. We all have saboteurs. We have to have it. We have to have that survivor brain to survive. We don't need it for thriving, but we need it to survive. The question is, how strong is your saboteurs? How strong are your saboteurs and your survivor brain versus the strength of your executive brain? That's what we kind of work out throughout the 8-week program. And we strengthen that thrive brain. We strengthen the executive brain, because when that's strengthened, no matter what the scenario, no matter what the situation, we turn it into gift and opportunity, and we make it work for us. So it doesn't matter how much stress there is, doesn't matter what the scenario is, doesn't matter who the person is that is in conflict with us or with each other, because our new brain is so highly wired and it's so activated. We've really worked it out in the gym, like you go into normal gym, for muscles, we work on mental muscle. You have then the ability to rise above it all. And there it is again. The saboteurs don't want resolution. They just want to be right. Okay, so there are 9 saboteurs. During our workshops, we either do some half-day workshops or full-day ones. We actually work a saboteur workshop into that, and that's where 20% of the insight comes. Then we start training people's brains to actually work for them so that they can have this thing called conflict management skills that helps them to act like a ninja or act like a Jedi under the most severe of pressure circumstances. They think like a Jedi. And they also move like a Jedi. That's kind of the skills that we have on offer for teams. And then for people who are in the leadership position, what that gives them is obviously a team that is highly connected, very productive, has very resourceful skills around conflict management, and hence does not have such a huge problem when it comes to stress management. So right now, I trust that you have got a question of how do I expose my team to this? Well, that's all we have on offer today. We have some free topics that are a lunch and learn type of event. Because remember, like I said in the beginning, you may know what you know. Your team may not know what it doesn't even know. And so as a leader, if you want to, ascend into that kind of level 4 leadership where you're actually exposing other people to leadership ways, then one of our free lunch and learn topics may be exactly what your team is after right now. I can do conflict management, stress management, sales goals. All of those are on offer today. So I look forward to seeing your team's name pop up. And so we can have a discussion around what would serve them the best around these times, because right now, I can tell you, your team does need support. Not because of anything that you've done. We've had a tumultuous 2.5 years. And now I'm starting to see quite a lot of evidence of things falling apart in our teams. Excuse me, do need a little bit of assistance. So I look forward to seeing your team. Pop me some questions down below, and I look forward to hearing your insights with regard to this outcome of 3 successful conflict resolution strategies. Know about the vortex and where your vortex is and the mirror neurons. Practice mindfulness at work. And we show you how. It starts with 10 seconds. And then be aware of your saboteurs, because conflict can trigger them. And when they're triggered, it's a slippery slope. All the best, and have a great day. Thank you for listening.